Welcome to Try with Ping. This is Ping Robert, and in this podcast, we will cover a range of different topics from culture, languages, and underrepresented stories. Join me with a cup of chai and listen to these stories. Hi everyone, welcome back to Try with Ping. Today we have a very special guest. She is very cool. I met her in my program and we just studied together. I had a course with her and we had great conversations. I just felt that today she can bring out more voices as a Chicana woman. And also to introduce that idea that I'm really not familiar with. Let's welcome Tracy Trinidad.
Hi, thanks for having me.
And you're also the Dean of Culture at McClone Academy.
Yes.
Is it in Colorado?
Yes. So we are located in the far northeast of Denver.
Ah, okay. And so is that what kind of school is that? Is it K-12 or just high school or charter?
So it's an ECE through 8 school. But for me specifically, I work in the middle school, so 6-8. And so what's really awesome about this school is that a lot of the students start off in ECE and they go all the way through 8th grade. So the only time they ever transition out is when they go to high school.
Ah, ECE means preschool, right?
Yes, early childhood.
Yeah, cool. And how long have you been there?
I am actually going into my third year, almost my third year. So, yeah.
And what is your general work that you do?
So with the Dean of Culture, I really collaborate with our Dean of Students to make sure that we are being equitable when it comes to discipline with students. We provide space for students to, have conversations, healthy conversations, de-escalation space. So I do a lot of what you would say is counselor work. However, I help students think about some of the decisions that they're making when it comes to behavior and really unpack that so that way we're not, in a cycle of, making negative choices. So I also support a Latina leadership group, which is so awesome. And so in this Latina leadership group, it's a space for students to talk about, how do I navigate this conversation with my mom and dad being, undocumented or first gen. And so it's really that safe space to talk about, what's happening at home and to develop leaders.
It sounds like it's a very important job, especially time as this, right? Racial identity coming into place in education, and you just provide or probably a brave space instead of a safe space for students to talk about what's going on, right?
Yes, and I think that the school I'm at is doing a really great job of, bringing race as part of the conversation and, acknowledging it as part of our educational experience. So, at this middle school, we have our Black Student Union, we have our Latina leaders, and then we have a Marshallese Mondays. We have a high population of Marshallese students.
Wow. Wow. We will definitely put some information about your school in the episode notes. So if the listeners are interested, could they contact you?
Sure. That would be great.
And so today we want to talk about Chicana, Chicano, Chicanx cultures and all that. Actually, I heard that word first from you. I've never heard that word before. Could you tell me about what Chicana is?
Sure. So I think if you ask anybody, what does it mean to be Chicana or Chicano? You're going to get probably a different definition just because when we think, when it comes to qualitative research, Chicanos are very multi-layered. And so for me personally, being Chicana is keeping and passing of political and social justice culture. So I reflect on the Chicano movement. It was started because Chicano voice wasn't really being acknowledged and farm workers were being oppressed and suppressed. So the movimiento started. And so people started to reclaim this word of Chicano to say hey, we've been here, we are here, and we're not leaving. And this is tied to this idea of Azatlan. So what Azatlan means is, okay, this is land that's always been here, and that includes California, Arizona, Utah, Nevada, New Mexico, Texas, and half of Colorado. So that whole area of the United States is called Azatlan. It belonged to Mexico. But because of the Treaty of Hidalgo in 1848, this land was stolen from us. And all of a sudden, one morning, all these Mexicans woke up and they were now U.S. citizens. So,
Oh.
yeah. So through that, a new culture was born. So really, that it's not really like Mexican culture, but it's not very. We're not we're not white.
Yeah.
So during the Chicano movement, this term Chicano was born, saying like, hey, we are here, we've been here, and you need to acknowledge us. We're not leaving. So I think oftentimes you might hear people say, well, where are you from? And I don't want to go in through my whole lineage of like, yeah, my grandmother was born in Torreon. I'm not doing that. I just say like, I'm Chicana, which means like, this is my land. It's Azatlan. I'm here. I've been here, and I'm not going. So it's more of a political identity.
So the biggest difference between Chicana and Latina is probably Latina come later to the US.
So Latina really really is all of Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's Latino. Like Colombians are Latino,
Yes.
Cubans are Latino.
Yeah.
But Chicano specifically, like first generation Mexican American.
Oh, okay. And also kind of got impacted after that whole boundary reset.
Yes.
Okay. So I am wondering, how would you define yourself as a Chicana? And is there any other stories around that, like you would receive a different perception from other people, and what happened in your life?
Sure. So how I would define myself as Chicana, I would say like my identity has evolved over time. And so like not until recently did I really have to reflect on, you know, Chicana feminism, like the whole intersectionality. Um, so Chicana feminism is really broken down into three tenets, which is cultural intuition, spirituality, and social justice. And so social justice is really, Delgado Bernal brought this into education, saying like, how are we going to disrupt and how are we going to bring Chicana voice into education? And she brought in Chicana feminist lens to say like, okay, this is my epistemological view on education. So it was more of like disrupt, dismantle, and rebuild for Latinos. And so I think about being a Chicana and Chicana feminist in education. I think, how am I being a social justice advocate, and how am I bringing cultural intuition into the space? And cultural intuition could be like the questions I'm asking, like if we have a new policy, it would be like, okay, how does this affect undocumented students, or how is this going to affect my first generation students? So like asking those questions is cultural intuition. And spirituality, it's not really saying like, hey, I'm religious. It's more of like, I'm relearning what was taken away from us through colonization. So it's like really challenging racism, sexism, homophobia, and other forms of material psychic oppression. So you'll see a lot of like Chicanos and Chicana feminists relearning traditions that were like taken away from us. So a lot of that could be ceremony. Ceremony is when you kind of go into a space where you're with your ancestors spiritually and others, and it's not really prayer. It's really hard for me to speak about, but we lost these traditions in colonization, and we're told to be Catholic. And so a lot of people are relearning, we're decolonizing and relearning our traditions. And so for me, I define myself as Chicana as, like I said, passing along cultural and political culture, reclaiming what was taken from me through colonization. So in a way, decolonizing, bringing cultural intuition into the education space, and making sure I'm just a social justice advocate for my gente. And gente means people.
Wow, that's really, really cool. I'm just wondering, have you experienced any incident or any form of oppression when growing up, being a Chicana?
Sure. So I had this one moment that I reflect on, and I was taking an English course at my high school. I grew up in a small town, and we were supposed to write persuasive essays. And you could persuade, like, why marijuana should be legal or why abortion should be legal. So everybody's writing on these topics. And I was like, well, everybody's taken a serious topic, so I'm just going to do mine on like why street racing should be legal, because in my little town people would often street race, and I was like, well, it would be interesting if we could make this legal. So I decided to write my persuasive essay on it, and my teacher did not like it. Out of all of the students who are writing on drugs and other things, she took me in the hallway and she said, if you're not going to take this class seriously, you might as well drop out now. I know you people are going to drop out anyway and just have babies. And
What?
yes. So I didn't know really like how to think about this. I didn't really have the knowledge I have now. I just thought like, this is a weird thing for a teacher to say to a student.
And how old were you?
I was 16 maybe, or 17. Yes. So I started thinking more of like, this is weird that this teacher would say this to me and like get away with it. And, if I reported something, usually the dean or AP or principal would be like, just move on. It's not that big of a deal. You're going to be out of here in a year, kind of thing, and kind of brush it under the rug. But then I started with a program called La Raza Youth Leadership Institute in Denver, and it was a Saturday course on Chicano history and social justice issues, and you would meet with other leaders around the Denver metro area. So I started taking these Saturday classes, and I started learning about like coded language, and I started learning about why am I learning about why is my curriculum Eurocentric, and I started thinking more and more about our education system. And I started getting angry, and I was like, the only way to make changes is to be a part of the education system. So with that whole issue with that teacher telling me what she told me, I decided to look at education through a public anthropological and sociological perspective. I didn't want to go in with a normative teacher prep program where I'm not really being challenged. I wanted to think about this more of like a systematic like social issue. So, I started taking sociology classes and anthropology classes on education. So I kind of got motivated that way to get into education. I didn't want to go in as a teacher. I wanted to just really learn about education in a different way. So fast forward, I end up working in Westminster, doing and creating a social and emotional learning program. And I ended up having to teach like a bunch of teachers and counselors about why social and emotional learning is important and why they need to adapt this curriculum I worked on. And guess who's sitting in my class? This teacher who told me like the racist comments that she said. So I look out in the audience and she's sitting there, and I use that example. I used her conversation as an example of how she didn't connect or use we language and how she was oppressive. I didn't say her name, but she knew I was talking about her. So it's really interesting that like that was the power move, and that's why I was like so happy that I was able to like confront the issue later on in life. And my parents always said, education is one thing a person can never take from you. Once you become liberated, people can't take that away from you. And so here I am with this education, a bachelor's and a master's, and this woman sitting in my class learning from me later on. So I kind of used that racist moment as empowerment to say, like, there's going to be other teachers like you, but I'm going to be in that space to coach you and walk you through that. Like, I can't give you that power.
Wow. That's just powerful. I mean, and it's so positive in a way. I do appreciate you sharing this story, Tracy. It's because a lot of times when we hear people telling this kind of oppressive stories, and then we kind of just end there. However, yeah, you just made a great comment about turning that oppression into empowerment, and you actually went out to make a change. And what was the interaction after that session?
Well, she came up after me, and she did talk, and she was like, I'm so sorry. Like, I didn't realize, like, she's like, I remember that, and I know you're talking about me. And, and I was like, I was like kind of shocked. I didn't really know how to take that conversation moving forward, but it's moments like
Mm.
that where we need to be in places we're not expected to be as
Yeah.
women of color.
Mm.
So I always try to make sure that moving forward that I'm in places I'm not expected to be, or in meetings that I like people would not expect me to be. So
Yeah.
like recently I was part of a board, a school board, to bring on a charter school. And I noticed that I was like the only woman of color on this board. And when it came time to pick a name for the school, they wanted to name it after a white male. And I was like the first to say, well, if you do a quick Google search, he was a racist and we can't name our school after another white male. So the school moved away from, naming the school after that person. So, we have to be present, and like Chicana feminists are their framework is, let's be in spaces to disrupt.
Yeah. Since we already talked about Chicana feminism, and I'm pretty sure a lot of us, including me, are not familiar with that topic and the whole notion of it, could you talk more about? Um, I know you already said that Chicana feminism is about disrupting social injustice. Is there anything more you would like to add?
Sure. So beyond the tenets of Chicana feminism, and I'll repeat them, it's cultural intuition, spirituality, which is decolonizing, and social justice. So during the Chicano movement, we realized like this is a very masculine, machismo dominated movement. Machismo is just like a strong masculine male.
Like chauvinism, is that how you say it?
Kind of, yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's a very male dominated movement where women's issues were not being acknowledged or addressed. And during this time, liberal feminism was happening, where brown women weren't being acknowledged either with the issues that they wanted to bring forth. So here we were in the middle of, feminism movement where black and brown women weren't acknowledged, and the Chicana movement, which was very male dominated. So the Chicanas, around 1970, decided like, hey, we need to start talking about issues that we are dealing with. And some of the issues were pretty interesting that I didn't know about. Um, so like forced sterilization. So a lot of times indigenous and Latina women, Chicana women, are forced sterilized. Like they will go to a doctor thinking like, they're gonna give birth, and then after they give birth, they get sterilized without being told that they are, and then they're like trying to have another child, and then they realize like I can't have another child because the doctor sterilized me without my permission. So that was happening in the
Mm,
60s and 70s.
yeah.
So not only did feminism acknowledged birth control and
Mm,
other rights, but Latinas were like, I mean, Chicanas were like, there's other things that we need to talk about that are happening in our brown community.
yeah.
So they were really bringing forth, issues that were happening within the intersectionality of being Chicana and being a woman.
Got it. Yeah, you make so much more sense to me. And thank you for explaining the whole notion. I mean, like you did a great job on explaining to me. So I'm also curious, is there any common assumption that people will have on you since a lot of listeners are from outside of the US? I mean, being a Chicana or people will just take you as a Latina. Are there any assumption that you experienced?
I think an assumption I often get is that I am not born here. Spanish is my native language. I probably have a lot of kids because Latinos have big families. And so people often ask me, like, oh, you don't have any kids? That's so weird. And I'm like, no, it's not weird.
Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
I don't, and I always think like this is so weird that people think this, and I always get like the question of, well, when did your family get here? And it's like, well, we never immigrated, we've been here,
Yeah.
and there's that saying, we didn't cross the border crossed us.
Yeah. 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 Oh. And like, so when people come up with those kind of questions, how do you respond?
I used to go in through the whole history of my family, and then I said, why am I trying to prove my my citizenship to somebody who's asking you this. So now when people say, like, where are you from, or when did your family get here? My short answer, I'm indigenous to this land. My family's been here.
Yeah. And is it true, correct me if I'm wrong, is it true that people are still not clear with the Chicana movement? A lot of people here.
I would say when I think about K-12 education, it takes a very strong teacher to teach it because we've been situated in white supremacy and Eurocentric curriculum for so long that when you decide to teach Chicano studies or Black studies, you kind of get pushback from the community. So it's usually like a short unit. But I would say there's a lot of people who do not know. And the only reason why I know about the Chicano movement were because my parents lived in Fort Lupton during the Chicano movement on a street called Harrison where the movimiento started. So my parents were very involved and active during that time. But not only that, but I was also involved in La Raza in high school. So, I had a woman, like a mentor, you would say, named Jenny Santos, who still runs the organization, and she made sure that we knew our history. So I would go into high school where other people did not know this, but I had to learn this on a Saturday on my own time. So I would say if you went to school in public school in K-12, in earlier years, yes, you would not know anything about the Chicana movement. Now we're seeing that this is being taught and it's becoming part of curriculum. But something to think about, it's like, why do they have it called ethnic studies or multicultural studies? Or why is this an elective when this should be core curriculum? Because Eurocentric curriculum is, quote, standard or common or traditional. That coded language right there.
Yeah. And I just wonder how that will affect people's perception towards different races, different history perspective, when that's the only curriculum available.
Yes, today I actually was having a conversation with a friend from high school, and she noticed that the Christopher Columbus statue was torn down recently in Denver, actually last night. And she said, I wonder what that means. Like, are we not going to be able to celebrate Thanksgiving anymore? Do they not teach it in schools anymore? And I told her, I said, every single school that I've worked in since I became an educator, we have not acknowledged Thanksgiving. I would say Denver Public Schools has done a really great job of not acknowledging Christopher Columbus or Thanksgiving. In fact, this year, the middle school students that I worked with, they did this awesome hallway bulletin that said that it had the United States, but instead of having the states, they actually had all the tribes mapped out. And it said, what is Thanksgiving? What's Thanksgiving really about? And here's middle school students talking about genocide, rape, stealing land, colonization. So we are seeing some changes. It's progress, and I think that's why I'm in the building, and that's why I'm in K-12, is because these conversations that I'm having with kids are like, Miss, I can't believe Christopher Columbus did all of that. But see, now they're knowing the truth now instead of, in high school like I did.
And I have to admit that, when I learned history in Taiwan, I also have no idea about genocide or taking land and all that. Probably the closest notion I got is from Pocahontas, the animation from Disney.
Oh yeah, Pocahontas.
Yeah. So like I, as an outsider, I would have not thought about colonialism or how other people have done to your tribe, to your communities. And thank you for bringing all that up. And it's very mind-blowing and thought-provoking. It's just like, wow, you're talking to a white paper over here, like white canvas, if you say.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think this year it was like so awesome. I had this kid reading the board after some students put up some facts about, colonization. And I'm walking down the hallway and he looks at me and he goes, Miss, this is so messed up. He's like, I never want to celebrate Thanksgiving again.
Yeah. If they knew the true history. Well, I mean, Will you say it's also because of the different races? Because I mean, white people might still want to celebrate because that's their history. But however, for Latinx or Chicanx communities, it's just not part of their culture.
I think in my family, like we still get together, we'll have dinner, we'll spend family time, but we don't acknowledge it as like this is the day Christopher Columbus discovered America. We've had some real conversations in my family like, hey, this is the day that indigenous people were raped and murdered. Let's acknowledge that. And so, I'm thankful for my family to give my like sibling, my brother Josh and I, that space to like have some real critical conversations around the dinner table during holidays, to say like, hey, this is messed up. My parents are like, I can't believe we learned this growing up, and they're learning this now, and they're very reflective on their K-12 experience as being oppressive and dominated by Eurocentric curriculum and dominant culture.
Excellent point. I do want to stretch a little bit for our conversation to go and reflect. I asked you about oppression that you experienced as a child, right? But
Mm-hmm.
now you're an adult and you definitely went through different educational system after college, and now you're doing a PhD. And I wonder, as an educator and as a Chicana educator, are there anything that you face and you're like, what is happening and why is it still happening?
I feel like I'm in a unique situation being in Montebello because I'm working with a lot of staff that you would say are woke. We're down to challenge the system. We're down to give our students that space to have those critical conversations around social justice advocacy. I mean, these are our, what I was going to say, I can't think of the word right now. So, our values, that's what it is. So, we
Mhm.
have these values, and,
Yeah.
you know, I'm pretty happy to be in that space where, if something were to happen, you can have a
Mm.
healthy conversation around it. And
Mm.
I would say it's very different than other schools that I've been working at, or working in.
Yeah.
So, I am lucky enough to work with an assistant principal who's Black, a principal who's Jewish, teachers who are multiracial. Again, we have those leadership groups that are race-based. We have these conversations with our kids all the time, and I think they're better prepared for the world to know that you know race does matter and acknowledging race is important, and how do we navigate these conversations when we're in different spaces. So I actually haven't had any crazy experiences in my recent workplace, like within my new school now. um, like recently for Dia de los Muertos, which is Day of the Dead, when you put up pictures of your ancestors on an altar, and you put their something that they loved eating or drinking, and you get to basically spend a day with that spirit. So it's cultural. So we asked the students, what do you want to do the altar to? Like, what do you want to dedicate the altar to? And the students said, let's do Black Lives Matter, because our school is Black and brown. So let's make sure that we include our Black community. And I said, that is so amazing that you guys want to do an altar for Black Lives Matter. So at the top of the altar, we had Trayvon Martin, and we just had a lot of other pictures from the movement, and talked about like why we were honoring these lives. And this was student led. This was not teacher led. This was like giving students voice. So here's some
Yeah.
students wanting to talk about why Black Lives Matter,
Mm.
and then bringing in their culture to acknowledge and honor.
Mm. Wow. That's just very encouraging. I mean, yeah, because I tried to put my question neutral, but I was like, you did actually mention a lot of positive examples that students are learning and growing, and like the awareness is getting higher now towards that. So what are the changes for, I mean, it's like, I'm pretty sure that when you come out from your school where you work at, you will still want to see some changes for racial issues in the US. What do you hope to see in the near future?
I hope to see, Chicano studies and Black or African American studies being core content. You know, I also feel like I want to see more Black and Latino educators because of, a cultural zip code. We see a lot of times when we read studies that kids are more engaged and learn more and actually have better grades when they have Black teachers. So I'd like to just see more diversity within teacher prep programs as far as like recruitment. Like we're still
Mm,
recovering from Brown versus Board of Education.
yeah.
So I don't know if you know, but during Brown versus Board of Education, when they
Mm,
desegregate at schools,
yeah.
Black students started getting bused to white schools. But during
Yeah.
this time, they fired all the Black teachers saying your services are no longer needed. So we're still
Oh,
recovering from that time of having, Black and brown teachers.
yeah. Got it. Yeah, the other day I was listening to on the radio and the news and all that, saying that, we need to have more black medical providers, because like the racial percentage of like people of color in medical fields are very low. And so I also got to think it's like a lot of families are just fighting for survival. And, education is a key. Like just your parents have said that like education is something that people cannot take away from you. However, a lot of black families or brown family, when they're struggling, they can't even get a fair game in education. And so I'm just wondering, what are the root causes of not having enough black teachers or brown teachers in the school systems?
Yeah, and I think sometimes when we think about, not having Black or brown teachers, I think a lot of times our students think like, I've never had a Black or brown teacher, I can never be a teacher. So then they don't get in the field, and then the cycle just happens of I've never seen myself, I've never had a brown doctor, therefore I can't be a doctor. So again, it goes back to we need to be in places we're not expected to be. And I think, in the school that I'm at, to have a lot of diversity, our students can see themselves in those positions. So I think, right now, I think we need to start having conversations with students earlier, you know, earlier about race and career and opportunities that they can have. So that way we have more diversity in different fields, as far as like medical, education, political. And I think if we're not in those places, what we're going to see is what we have seen now, white supremacy. We see it in education, we see it in the police force, we see it in politics. And it's because like our presence isn't there because we haven't been told we can, or we haven't had the education or curriculum to say that we can. And I think like it all comes, all of these changes can happen, and I think they all happen within the classroom.
I have a last question. I mean, you're an educator and you work with kids and teachers all the time. However, I think I read somewhere also saying that family education is so crucial, and then it's kind of like how the kids grow up and the perception or opinions and ideas kind of just got rooted in their mind. So if a parent come to you and said that, I really don't know about this. How can I start talking about racial issues or become more diverse in my mindset? How would you say to them?
Well, first I would ask, like, how much time do you have? Because it's, and I would say, like, start off small, like
Mm,
YouTube videos, like Kendi does some great conversations, or Dr. Love with abolitionist education, or, just reading things and asking questions around it. I mean, it just starts off with, like today I was reading about healthcare and Trump wants to repeal Obamacare. And it's like, okay, if I'm a parent and I see that, what questions do I have, and how do I start having conversations with my student around that? And it's okay to be vulnerable and not know. I think that's the thing, is just because we're a parent doesn't mean we should have all the answers. Like, we can go to the school and ask teachers and other staff about, hey, how do I have this conversation with my student? So I think what's great that we've done before at my school is we've had parent community circles where we talk about some heavy stuff and just let parents be vulnerable in that space and just ask questions. Even if, as educators, like, maybe this might be the first time we're learning how to navigate a certain situation or topic, and we just have to learn together, and just know that it's okay to ask questions, and it's okay to read little articles here and there. And I think the biggest thing that's going to keep us from growing is not asking questions.
Awesome point. Before we go, do you have any last comments for anyone, or anything related to what you just talked about?
I think, like, as we watch the news and we're reading things, it's just good to be conscious of, how is this situation or policy or bill impacting this community? And if so, is it impacting the community differently? Right now, we see that a lot of our Gen Z is out there protesting for Black lives. And so I think right now we just have to ask students, ask teens, ask everybody, like, hey, how is this impacting you? And just be vulnerable and ready to listen.
Yeah, I can hear Tracy has a lot of compassion in the whole movement, and also throughout her personal life, that she has gone through and overcome the notion of oppression, and she's still continuing her work in her school and workplace. And I think she brought up a great idea, that all of us, we can learn, not just for parents or students. It's like all of us, we can learn how to be vulnerable and humble, to keep learning, because things are changing every day. And, well, I personally can't know everything, but keep learning will help us to start those kind of conversations, even when it's hard. But when we have it, at least there is a starting point. Thank you so much, Tracy, for coming to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Chai with Ping. Let us hear your voices and stories. Please share this episode, like and follow us on Instagram at chaiwithping. You can also email us at chaiwithping@gmail.com. Till next time.